This is Regenerative Skills, the podcast helping you to learn the skills and solutions to create an abundant and connected future. I'm your host, Oliver Gaucher. So at this point, I think we all know that YouTube videos, social media posts, and blog snippets will only get you so far. If you really want to develop the knowledge and skills you need to live regeneratively, you need the thorough information in a full book. Through their diverse range of publications, New Society Publishers' books explore topics that are at the forefront of creating positive change in our world. From regenerative agriculture and permaculture to social justice and eco-conscious living, their books cover a wide spectrum of subjects that empower readers to lead more regenerative and fulfilling lives. So whether you're a seasoned environmentalist, a curious beginner, or someone simply seeking inspiration and guidance on your journey towards regenerative living, New Society Publishers is here to support you every step of the way. If you subscribe right now to their newsletter at newsociety.com, you'll be the first to receive sneak peeks at new content and get discounts on upcoming title releases. You'll even get an exclusive discount code on their first purchase of books, ebooks, or audiobooks. So sign up today at newsociety.com. Welcome everybody to this panel focused on agroforestry. This is part of the series that we're doing through the Climate Farmers Academy, which is dedicated to helping peer-to-peer learning between farmers all across Europe, especially those on their transition towards regenerative management. This series has covered a lot of ground already and talked to people from all over Europe and other parts of the world, hoping to share knowledge freely here so that people can accelerate their learning journeys as they aspire to regenerative management of their farms. Today, like I said, we're going to focus on many different aspects of agroforestry, from experienced practitioners from different corners of Europe. Goodness knows we have some very different microclimates and climatic biomes and regions here in the continent. And so we want to give a perspective on what agroforestry can look like in the different farming contexts of this diverse continent. So let's start with these introductions. So Lorenz, why don't you tell us where you're coming in from and your relationship to agroforestry over the last few years?
Yes, thank you, Oliver. Welcome. I'm Lorenz. I'm from Germany. I'm working at Gut and Bösel. It's quite big farm in eastern Germany. We have 1,000 hectares of cropland, and since 2019 we're practicing different kinds or different forms of regenerative agriculture. And one of this is agroforestry. We have quite some experience with syntropic agroforestry. We have about, to not tell any crap, 24 kilometers of syntropic tree lines on about 42 hectares. We also have some alley cropping systems with poplars. And my work is mostly centered around soil health and plant health. So, but also agroforestry is a huge passion of mine. So I'm happy to share what I know and what I experience here on the farm. But I have to say all the work that was done here was done by my good friend Ranke, who's the mastermind behind all our systems. But I'm happy to share all that I know.
Thank you, Lorenz. And if anybody is interested in hearing from Renke and the systems that he developed at Gut and Bösel, you can check out the Regenerative Skills podcast. And in that process, I'll give this over then to Dmitri. Go ahead and introduce yourself, buddy, and tell us about how you work with agroforestry where you're based.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on, Oliver. So I started about 7 or 8 years ago working on Ernst Goetsche's farm as well. So kind of went straight into the syntropic agroforestry systems, and I was lucky to be on his farm in Brazil. So that was quite an introduction to agroforestry. And since then, I wasn't quite inspired by him and by others to start, like Mark Shepard as well, with some interesting agroforest systems, although I've never been there to see him. But that inspired us to start a farm in Greece with my family called Mazi Farm in an island of kind of east of Athens. And so I spent 3 years over there. The farm's still running. My dad's managing it. But I spent 3 years over there, and afterwards I moved on and went to work on some different farms. Some of them you may know, like Matteo's farm in Italy. And little by little, I made my way to Portugal, where I'm settled now. In the meantime, also created the Regenerative Agroforestry podcast, which is on a pause at the moment, on a sabbatical. But definitely, we're planning to get it started again pretty soon. So let's see. So yeah, hopefully we're gonna get some more interviews out. But do check it out. It's got some really interesting stuff on there. And then since I've arrived in Portugal, let's say for the past 3 years, 4 years now, I've been really focusing on the tree crop side of things. So really looking at tree crops such as olives, almonds, pistachios, which are the crops that we also work with on the farm in Greece. But I've been focusing more on the intensive side of these crops. So let's call them super intensive olives, intensive almonds. So I've been very much focusing on these systems and trying to understand how we can, make them more or implement regenerative practices within these systems and kind of influence this intensive industry for reasons that are pretty obvious. So yeah, that's what we've been doing. Agroforestry is always present and always part of our regenerative toolkit. And yeah, very happy to talk also about the experience we're having in Greece with lots of different types of systems there. On a smaller scale, we've got a 5-hectare farm there, but it's been pretty interesting. And then talk about how we're looking at agroforestry in a more large scale setting as well on these farms, which are often 1,000 hectare in size. So yeah, that's what I've got to share today.
Marvelous. Thank you, Dmitri. And he had a recent interview with Kuhn of the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture podcast, which I would highly recommend that you check out if you want to know more about his work. Now, moving lastly to Joshua Sparks. Joshua, tell us about your work and how you got involved in farming and agroforestry.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. So I'm Josh. I manage a 17-acre market garden North Devon in England. Basically, I came to the land about 5 years ago. I worked for a company called the Collective at Wolseley. So we're a collection of different businesses set up to support each other. So I grow predominantly for our pub, the Farmer's Arms, the fish shop, the shop, and supply of that, plus with some community stuff. But when we came to the land, what I wanted to do was adopt a form of natural farming that I had studied a little bit in Japan and read about. And so I wanted a farming practice that grew in a way where it benefited an ecosystem. So we try to grow our food as part of that ecosystem to protect as much biodiversity as possible. And really that evolved into agroforestry. And so we have a lot of food forests. We're trying to develop an agricultural food forest with the lessons from people like Wouter van Eck to try and prove that food forests can be agricultural systems. And we're starting to dip our toes and start to adapt forms of syntropic agriculture. I've got a couple of guys on the farm who've done courses in Europe, and we're trying to blend food forests and syntropic agriculture to match our natural farming system as much as possible.
Brilliant. So we have really different perspectives and surroundings where each of you guys are located. And maybe as part of the answer that you're going to give to the next question, tell me about what agroforestry typically looks like around you. And then the question is, where do you see the biggest opportunities or missed opportunities for integrating trees, tree crops, agroforestry in general, in the types of enterprises that you see that are common in your area? Maybe we'll go back to Lorenz.
Well, I think around my area in Eastern Germany, agroforestry is becoming more and more popular because it's so valuable for our landscape. We have quite big, like fields from our history of, the communist times, and also quite light and sandy soil. So wind erosion is usually a huge thing here in this area. But most people who use agroforestry around here are mostly focusing on, popular monocultures for energy production. So we also have a system like this, but within our work, we also have a foundation that's about researching different methods, and we have, compared those systems to our syntropic systems, and we came to very interesting findings that, basically the more diverse, the more resilient, as everybody expected. But it's nice to have it black on white. But yeah, it was quite impressive to see this difference scientifically proven. Also, that basically in the syntropic system we have a way faster carbon buildup in the soil, even in the subsoil, at such a speed, such a rate that the scientists could not believe it in a way. And also the microbial population was extremely different than compared to the row crops in between. So yeah, that's about that. I will send the link to the study in the chat.
That would be really cool to see. Thank you. Dmitri, I see the context that you're working with very similarly in my area, the increasing intensification of 3 primary crops of this landscape that's drying out very quickly, which is olives, almonds, and to a lesser degree, pistachios, at least where I am. Tell me about what you see as the opportunities in your area, even within this context of increased intensification.
Yeah, so at the moment, as you can imagine, there's not a great deal of agroforestry going on. There's actually the opposite process going on where we've got de-agroforestry going on. So basically that's people cutting back a lot of the trees that are present on the farms as much as possible. So what I mean, when we're working with tree crops, it's kind of agroforestry is kind of like how trees can support trees, right? So it's not trees supporting, a herbaceous plant or a cereal or annual crop. It's really how trees can support trees. So it's kind of a unique interaction there because there isn't, they're both trees. So there is a bit of you need to find the right way to make them, let's say, fit in. And then when you think about intensive systems, you've got a very high density of these trees. You've got a lot of mechanization. Things are done on a large scale. So you've got to also integrate the whole logistics of the farm into these systems. But one of the things that we're seeing at the moment happening a lot is a lot of the trees that are in the steeper areas or in the riparian areas, they're basically getting cut back. So they're trying to plant trees as close as possible. They're trying to basically maximize the amount of trees that you can planted per hectare. And that's obviously leads to problems, not in the short term necessarily. You don't feel the issues in the short term because, you're just you're planting more trees per hectare. I mean, the soil is pretty much the same. But what happens is that in the medium term and the long term, we're going to start to see the landscape, let's say, resilient, fall apart because we don't have basic ecological infrastructure to sustain, for example, river life in the riparian areas, so in the streams, or for example, in the steeper areas, we start to get a lot of erosion, a crazy amount of erosion, actually, in these orchards because you're passing many times with tractors, and so the landscape is just extremely exposed, often literally just bare, and life little by little struggles more and more to establish itself and sustain itself. So and at the same time, the issue is in the short term, these intensive crops, they continue to produce well because they are fed with a lot of water and a lot of fertilizer, and they're just pumping. It's an input-based system. So it's a bit of a hard sell, agroforestry, in this context because it represents quite a significant cost. But I think this is something we can break into little by little if we get to that. But definitely the key opportunities that we're seeing here, there's a few of them. And as always, it's very much dependent on the constraints that each farm is exposed to. So many of these farms, for example, have a lot of wind issues and a lot of they're very exposed. And whilst wind is necessary in some of these systems, excessive wind does cause stress to the plant. For example, whenever there's very low temperatures, the wind can dramatically increase the frost risk. And so what you're seeing here is you have an opportunity to, for example, plant windbreaks in order to, on a kind of a wider spacing, in order to allow for some kind of climate buffer to happen. Then we've got also the riparians that are essential for landscape hydration and biodiversity. And this is, again, kind of an easy win to plant trees along these areas. And as you start to see, then you've got the steeper areas as well that I mentioned, with where currently nothing's planted or trees have been removed or trees have been planted. Olives and almonds have been planted when, they kind of struggle to produce. they're not extremely, some areas on the land are just kind of either too wet or too dry or too steep, and they're just expensive to manage. And they don't, it's not, the cost benefit is just not worth investing in planting in these areas. People still do plant in them, but that should be removed and just turned into some ecological area, a small bosque or something like this. And then when you see all these different systems, then you want to connect them together, right? And then you just want to create that landscape matrix and connecting all these different systems together so that we can create some kind of a landscape where biodiversity can move within it, and where but we're starting to also place trees in a smart place where they're solving issues around erosion, capturing that sediment that's coming out of the orchards, capturing that excessive fertilizer as well that's being leached out. So these are all kind of the functions that we want to see working on trees, and the opportunities to plant them are there. Unfortunately, it's not happening at the moment at scale because it's not really considered a huge priority. Pollution is kind of somebody else's problem. Biodiversity is also somebody else's problem. So at the moment, but we're working on changing that. Yeah.
That's very good to see that there's still potential there, and people are starting to see the benefits of integrating more diverse systems into these intensive orchards. Josh, your context is really interesting in that very few people have heard about integrating trees into market garden systems. Usually that's intensive horticulture on an annual basis. Tell me about how you're integrating perennials and trees into the larger farm complex and how this interacts with the diversity of the systems that you've installed.
Yeah, so in this country, our kind of agroforestry is generally a very simple system. So if classic is usually apples and gooseberries, and that's regarded as agroforestry in this country. Generally in our annual production and small market gardens, it's quite rare to see agroforestry, but that is picking up a lot of pace now. And it's getting very popular as we're recognizing that climate resilience is becoming a big factor in our food growing. For us here, it's getting very unpredictable in the way that we grow annual production, especially. And the growing of annuals is becoming a riskier and riskier enterprise. It's predicted in the UK we're going to lose about 50% of our market gardens in the next year to 2 years, which is a terrifying statistic. And so what we have to do is trying to create farm resilience on the farm as much as possible, while also protecting and building biodiversity, which is the paramount to what we're trying to do here. So many times is that in order to fix that first problem, usually the first thing that takes the brunt of that is the biodiversity, whether that's putting up more polytunnels, more netted protection, anything that acts as a buffer to the climate and nature. And so really how we see it as a progression is that the use of perennial vegetables, again, seems to be building quite a lot of popularity. We're in the process of turning our market garden predominantly into a perennial system. And the use of the perennial vegetables in kind of balance with our agroforestry systems should add a lot of climate resilience so that we can maintain that food production. And as a business, not have to worry about those losses, which can almost be business breaking or destroying, which seems to be happening. So the next phase that we're into is really we're creating very diverse agroforestry systems. I wouldn't say we're a syntropic farm, but there's elements of kind of syntropic agriculture that we really like. And we're, like I said, we're applying that with our food forest mentality as well. And we're kind of going the line of very diverse, dense plantings of linear food forests, borrowing a lot of ideas from syntropic agriculture. And as we put more of that agroforestry on the farm, we're using that space to also start to plant perennial vegetables en masse. And so we're just in the process of putting a nut forest on the farm. So chestnuts, walnuts, cobs, in very dense planting pockets. And then we're going to use that as a space to grow cooked perennial greens, Korean asters, Korean celeries, good King Henrys, and everything like that, and start to create very dense, close agroforestry systems with perennial vegetables, hopefully to prove that perennial vegetables are an alternative to, like I said, putting up loads of annual protection systems that we don't want to do, because again, it impacts our biodiversity quite hard. But like I said, perennial veg and agroforestry is really picking up steam in the UK, and it's kind of coming out a necessity for us because, like I said, it's just getting harder and harder to become a business and maintain a business and grow that food at the same time.
Yeah, so a lot of what we've talked about so far is all coming back to longer term resilience. And yet there's still the uphill battle of the initial investment and the time that it takes for these longer term maturation crops to start to give the benefits that you're hoping to receive. Before we move on, Josh, how do you talk to somebody about incorporating this into a business model when oftentimes cash flow is already a problem in farms, and the turnover is required just to continue the bankroll, whereas some of these are going to take multiple seasons or even closer to a decade to start to see a return on. How do you square that from the business end?
Yeah, so I kind of joked that we did everything backwards, unfortunately. We're now putting in more windbreaks because we realized wind is a problem for us here, living in a very high up, windy part of the UK. We've only just put our nursery in now, which we should have done in the beginning. And so what we generally say now is, at least put that small nursery in. I try to really push the message of try and make yourself as self-reliable in plant production as much as possible. A lot of our agroforestry, we specifically use trees and shrubs and those crops that can be propagated through cuttings or easily germinate, and we can easily do it by seed. We try, when possible, to keep a lot of kind of complicated propagation out of it because we just don't have facilities to do that. And so we're trying to build a system where you can propagate it in-house yourself. A lot of our agroforestry now is 90% cuttings and direct seeding. We've stepped a lot away from buying in trees and buying in bare roots and whips as much as possible to prove that point to people that you don't need that money. And also for us as a business, we want to cut our costs a lot as well. And the way that Birch Farm grows is we treat everything like one ginormous polyculture, agroforestry, vegetable production, everything. And so what we're doing is, because we have very diverse vegetable polycultures, we try to get 5 different kind of genus or plant families in one bed at one time. And what makes Birch Farm unique is we don't actually weed that much. We've created a farming system where we grow our crops in balance with weeds, recognizing that those weeds are key to soil fertility and biodiversity. But those polycultures open up opportunities that, while it takes 3 years for our perennials to bulk up, we can use those pockets and times while there's gaps, and we can still grow our annual production in amongst those perennials. And what we're starting to do is grow our perennials. It takes 2 to 3 years for our perennials to fill that position, but that's still 2 to 3 years that we can already start to grow annuals in amongst that until we can phase them out. And like any market garden, salad production is our big cash flow here. So salad is how we generate a lot of our income. And we're finding that actually perennial salads, where we can pick in 1 year, 2 years at the tops. And so already off the bat, we can do a lot of perennial salad mixes. And actually all our perennials this year all our salads will be perennial based this year. We're taking a big step back from annual production. And so we use a lot of things like Morris alba, Tilia cordata. They become our lettuce replacements. And we're starting to really delve into that kind of tree leaf edible elements as well. And then we have other perennials that we supplement that with. So actually from the salad point of view, we can actually generate a really good impact, pretty quickly. And so that's kind of how we do it. So we're phasing it, which is important. Something I learned from the farm by doing this is that if you do it all at once, it kind of bites you in the arse a little bit. And so we take a mentality of slowly phasing that and allowing it to like gently kind of ease in until you build up those numbers, really.
Fantastic. Really cool example to watch continue to grow here. Dmitri, you are in an area that's profitability and cash flow is kind of everything in these intensive business models. And you already talked about the difficulty of making the financial case to invest in more diversity and putting in trees within these systems. Where do you see the way of convincing that this can start to pay off and maybe even accelerate that lag period that it takes for them to see a return when integrating them into the systems you talked about earlier?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I was just thinking about the Morris alba salads. It's just sticking in my mind. I really want to eat some of these salads. Josh, you need to get some of these salads over to us here in Portugal. I guess we can take them ourselves. Actually, we've got these trees here. I need to find a way to eat a perennial salad. Love it.
I mean, people laughed when we did it and we proposed the idea, and people were like, that's absolutely nonsense. What are you talking about? And actually, what we proved was our perennial salads were more delicious than the annual salads, more nutritious, more mineral. And now actually people can't get enough of the perennial salads. Sorry, not to butt in, but that point is that actually we can sell these things at a high yield to chefs because they're now so we've basically got them hooked on it and they're so desperate to get more and more of it. But yeah, no, definitely perennial salads are delicious.
Love it. Okay, so yeah, going back to our context, there's 2 things. Firstly, how are we going to scale out these systems? Well, that's secondly. And the first thing is how are we going to convince these large producers and growers to invest in agroforestry? And that's kind of 2 separate, that needs to be 2 separate answers there, of course. But the first part about convincing, well, the negative side of it is that it's managed by investors that are looking a lot at the bottom line. But the positive side is that often these large investment funds, they have to meet, or they are under increasing pressure to meet sustainability objectives. They are under increasing pressure to report on what they're doing around carbon, etc. And one of the huge things, or very positive things of agroforestry, is the amount of carbon we can store in these systems. So there's different ways that I think most of us are familiar here as to how we can sell this, how we can kind of convince them. But it's very much around, do the right thing. It's not necessarily, not often the case is it going to be this can directly benefit your economics. Because establish a hedge, it'll take 10 years to really start for the biodiversity to really kick in and for it to produce a lot of ecological benefits. Whereas, for example, planting a diverse cover crop, it's from year one. So when we're coming in and we're consulting these people about, doing regenerative agriculture, the first thing we tell them to do is not necessarily plant a tree. It's more about let's kickstart biodiversity through, separating some areas, reducing on herbicide sprays, not cleaning everything, letting things run a bit more wild, planting a cover crop with a mixed species, hopefully 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 species. So that's kind of how we're approaching this kind of direct benefits of biodiversity and ecology to these farms. But then telling them, there's no economic benefit for them to prevent nutrient runoff. That's more about, them feeling like they need to do the right thing. And a lot of them do feel like they want to do the right thing. And that's when we come in. And so again, there's mechanisms. We need to be working more on biodiversity credits and carbon credits for these farmers to convince them. That's clearly going to be something that helps a lot. Also, governments, not in Portugal, or not a lot in Portugal, but in France, for example, the governments are funding a lot of agroforestry systems, are paying for everything, including the farmer's time. So these are the kind of things that are going to be, because, these things are, of course, the farmers need to farm, and these funds, etc., they need to be profitable. But, in the sense, they are responsible. What I meant is that they're responsible for what for being sustainable, but also the investment that they need to put in to regenerate to regenerate this ecosystem is not necessarily all of their responsibility. This is years and years and years of us cutting things back and removing trees. So it's not necessarily all their responsibility, and also it's going to benefit a variety of people. It's going to benefit society. It's a public good, as we say in economics. And so, the government help, carbon credits, all these things, there are mechanisms they're gonna help them to do that. And the other one is pressure. Under pressure from, they need to do the right thing. There's rules, regulations that are evolving that sometimes not evolving, but this is the kind of stuff that puts them under pressure. So once they're feeling that pressure and they're seeing that opportunity, which comes more from let's say a communication standpoint or a business resilience standpoint from a regulation perspective, all these things, or from them being like, we want to do the right thing and the investors actually have sustainability objectives. Okay. Once they've got that, then we need to think how we're going to do it at scale and how we're going to actually, and this is where Josh was making some really good points here, saying, you don't come in and plant a whole agroforestry system on 500 hectares, not even 200 hectares, not even 100 hectares at once. And then you need to have the systems in place to be able to be efficient. Josh was saying, like, now we don't, buy trees. We are working with cuttings and working with seeds. Well, each context has its own planting, kind of its own trees, its own planting techniques and methods that will make it much more cost efficient to do so. And so then we need to have teams. And this is where there's business opportunities for companies to set up and be like, okay, well, we're experts in agroforestry planting at scale. We're using forestry machinery, so we can, do this at scale. We've got solid weed management techniques so that we can establish the trees with a lower risk, because the problem is always planting trees and them dying. How many projects have I seen where we've planted lots of trees and they just haven't, they haven't held up? So all these things, there's all these little technical details that we need to refine to keep the price down and make sure we can do things at every time larger and larger scale, and this obviously needs to be very adapted to the pedoclimatic context. And then we have something that's valuable for the funds. A lot of funds would love to do this, but don't know how to do it in a way that is efficient and low risk. So it's also, if we come up to them with a solution as how to do that, they're much more likely to be able to say, okay, I can connect the different things here. I've got the carbon credits coming in. I've got my investors on board because I've convinced them around the sustainability and the risk thing. I've got I want to benefit my local community as well. That's every time the local community is putting more and more pressure on these super intensive systems. They don't want them close to their houses. They're frustrated with them. There's political pressure going on. So there's opportunities for them here, and they're starting to see that. And some of them have very well have seen that very well. And so then we, little by little, we start to create that change. But that change takes a long time. And obviously, as you'll know, this is a kind of processes that last 5 to 10 years. So little by little.
Yeah, and that's just going to be part of it in any scenario. These are longer mature systems. There are, as you've both outlined already, lots of ways to cut down the risk in getting to points of maturity and seeing the different benefits that can bring. But I really like what you mentioned there, and this is something that we've definitely found and can echo from the climate farmers' perspective, is that it should not be all on the farmers themselves. They are often working under pressures that are entirely external and being asked to pull so much more than their own weight in the way that they work, and also carry the benefits and the ecological services that we all benefit from on top of the pressures that they're already under. And so this should be a common good that we collectively invest in. I completely agree with that. Now, Lorenz, I know that the farm that you're working with at Gut and Bösel has had an outside influence on what is happening in agroforestry in your area and even further outside because of an incredible investment in research and in monitoring and in R&D that you guys have done over quite a few years now. Can you give us a perspective on some of the more interesting findings? Because you told us some stuff at the beginning that is quite intuitive. You put more diversity into a system, you get better results in resilience and in soil biodiversity. But what are some of the things that have been really shocking or inspiring to you from the R&D that you guys have done on the farm?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think, we have quite a unique farm setting because we have this foundation that is, basically making our farm into real life lab kind of. And so we have the opportunity to try a lot of different things and, grow very fast in terms of experience with less risk than like commercial operation. So at the same time, we are a commercial operation in our farming context, but not in the agroforestry yet. But I think the biggest findings were, first of all, that in those diverse systems, we went pretty fast from buying the trees from a tree nursery to going almost completely to direct seeding and cuttings like Josh is also doing, because we were experiencing here in our very dry climate, we have around 400 to 500 millimeters of precipitation a year on average and sandy soil. So it's quite dry. And in a low input system like we want to implement, we have no chance to water our 42 kilometers. So we want a very low input resilient system. And by planting mostly trees by seed, we were seeing that we could achieve resilience and plant health that we were not achieving by any means from like trees from the tree nursery. We also started our own tree nursery in the second year, where we took very good care or focused a lot on good root development, planting our trees in root pouches or root trainers. And they are also performing very well, also making our own substrate for them, and may produce some very nice compost for the tree nursery. And this was the biggest game changer. So we have now like failures of less than 3%. So almost all trees survive. And this is quite rare for this area where other people have higher losses. And I think the study that I already mentioned was giving the way more insights to the soil microbial aspect. So just observing that or being able to show that in our syntropic systems we have less pathogens in the soil, in the tree rows than in the cropland beside of it. First of all, then also, the faster carbon buildup, the potential of, building stable humus is just immense in those systems. Also, the biodiversity is way higher. So there's many benefits from those systems that we could show, and that might lead this kind of agroforestry into a more adaptable or more widespread application, because it's just so efficient in producing very fast to help to build very good soil formation and increase biodiversity. But I think one of our most interesting fields is our forest transitioning project, where we were transitioning pine monoculture plot into a diverse forest, a mixed forest. And there we had like the worst conditions you can imagine. Very, very sandy soil, like literally beach sand. The pines were having a very bad influence on the soil pH. It was around 3, and like aluminium available, not a lot. We made a lot of soil tests as well. No accessible nutrients, basically. We did not lime the soil or did anything. We just did a clear cut on one part and left some trees in another part and planted a very diverse mixture by direct seeding, but also some trees from the tree nursery, from our tree nursery. And it was insane to see how fast actually the plants were growing in the clear-cut plot. And we also had the university here to research this, and they were even finding that the more shade-loving trees were doing better in the clear-cut part than where there were some old trees left over. And the growth was like just literally 3 times higher in the clear-cut part. So we were wondering what's going on there, and the only reason we can explain it or the only way we can explain it is that by clear cutting, we were actually like rebooting all the mycorrhizal connections in the soil, and they were basically providing everything that the plants needed, even though it was not visible on the soil tests. The microbiology made everything accessible what the plants needed. And because I forgot to mention that the part where we had the traffic parts in the forest where the big machines were running, even in the clear cut spot, we also subsoiled this area. We planted this diverse mix in it, and nothing grew. Everything died, even though the compaction was gone, but the microbial population was also gone from the compaction. So it was clearly visible that the mycorrhiza did all the work in sustaining the plants to grow this healthy. So this is our most impressive finding, I would say.
Well, that is fascinating. I had not heard that before. I would love to learn more about what you guys found in this. And I'm really glad too that you mentioned forestry in general, because it's often the part that's left out of agroforestry, but timber is absolutely an agricultural product if you lump it into the broader definition. And many farmers that we speak to, at least, have portions of their farm that are left in forestry and bosque, and something that they either manage actively or they don't. And seeing this as a potential for an extra income or ecological benefits, or even buffering of some of the ecological extremes that we're experiencing, I think there's a lot of potential in that. And seeing that you guys have done some trials and seen some really positive results in reconfiguring the health of your forest could offer opportunities for other farmers as well. Dmitri, same question to you. Going into the opportunities that you had mentioned before, what are some of the challenges that you have faced establishing these more diverse agroforestry systems? And how did you overcome those? What are some of the ways that you have increased the success rates of adding the diversity that you've talked about before?
So we'll have to shift over to Greece now in terms of where we planted much more diverse systems there. And I think that one of the key things that we found, which is very logical, is just irrigation, being able to irrigate at a larger scale. So being able to, when the trees are planted, quickly after that, install an irrigation pipe and be able to. And okay, we're in Greece, right? So this is a very specific climate, and we're in Greece. We are on a hill as well. We're not in a valley bottom where there may be some chances of a tree surviving there. And we're in a very degraded context as well, very exposed to wind. Wind's actually carrying a lot of chlorine and sodium because it's in an island. So, it's got all these it's very, very difficult context. And so it's very important to be able to establish them well. And again, this is maybe obvious for some, maybe less for others, but you really need to invest quite heavily at the start. You save a lot of money by making sure you prepare the soil well, making sure that you applied an amendment, compost, provided some support on a chemical and biological basis for the plant, for the tree. And yeah, I love Lorenz's stories around also having root trained trees that have deeper roots. We weren't able to really test the difference between trees that we bought from nurseries that didn't have these systems and trees that did. But I really trust the logic is there, and I've heard this in other instances, so I really trust that that's important. The problem is, going back to what Josh was saying, like doing it yourself is important in this case in terms of the nursery, because it's hard to find trees that are properly root trained. There are some, of course, and especially in regions where they have more of a forestry culture. But in our regions, there's not much of a forestry culture because it's not really worth producing timber in southern Greece. You plant tree crops for nuts, but not for wood. So yeah, these are the key aspects, I would say. And this is linked to the syntropic stuff, because when we planted in Greece, we obviously planted many different species together. And what happens is that you can plant, for example, a small oak tree on its own, and you can plant a line of them. They may do okay. But if you plant a hedge and you plant many different species together, and the faster growing species that are more resilient on the northern side, where firstly, where they don't create so much light issues, unless you're managing it regularly, of course, but they're on the northern side, and also where the wind's coming from and the cold is coming from, then you're really going to shelter the slower growing plant, and you're going to get faster growth rates. So we saw our land just transform by creating a shelter belt with a species called Myoporum hispanicum, which is a species from New Zealand, an incredible species. It's like fire resistant, kind of succulent leaf, very fast growing with water, stops growing without water, but it just doesn't die, it stagnates. It's really, really impressive. They planted also a lot in Portugal, and that's the kind of hedge species, it also tolerates pruning very well. And yeah, that's the kind of species. It's very resistant to salty winds and burning and it doesn't burn as well. We try to put it on fire and it just struggles to burn. So it's just such a useful multifunctional species, and I think there's also something to say around choosing the right species and knowing your species well. So again, and this takes time, and it's really important to be talking with people that are implementing agroforestry systems or smart diversified forestry systems. But these details do matter in terms of the pots, for example, but just the species. People that have experience with tried different species have been able to say that these are the ones that are good for these kind of in these contexts, or that provide these functions. There's a lot of knowledge that's necessary to be able to design them well from the start and plant the right tree in the right place. So that's really important to take into account as well.
Nice. There's a lot of really good advice there, and it squares both with what Lorenz was saying and what we're kind of doing out here. Our team is helping these replanting projects to figure out their hydrology first, because water is such a limiting factor, especially to growth in the longer term. You might be able to keep a plant alive for a little while, but if you've got compacted soil, if there's a lack of moisture, they might stagnate or go into senescence really easily. And also some sort of form of amendment to help the soil along in its succession to be able to to help and to produce higher level succession plants. It's like, putting in something that needs a lot of requirements straight into desert sand, similar to what Lorenz was talking about, but different conditions a little bit. We've also seen really good results with that. Now, Josh, I know that water is not your limiting factor, but there have been a lot of other things that were barriers, were roadblocks when you guys got started. I know your soil conditions were really tough. Tell us about what you have found that helps to increase the success rate in the different plantings that you've done.
Yeah, so we are the complete opposite. Rain and water is probably our nemesis here as much as possible. So I can't really speak from an experience of drought, definitely not. When we took over the site, we were a dairy pasture. So the part of Devon we are in is very intensive dairy agriculture. And so predominantly that is a lot of slurry, a lot of silage cutting. They can cut up to 10 to 12 times a year if the weather's right. And so what we're finding when we took the farm over, the soils were really heavily compacted due to constant tractor applications of slurry. A lot of the fields aren't really for silage production. It's basically because they have so many animals inside, they produce so much slurry, they have to get it out. And so what a lot of land acquisition around here is actually dairy farms just buying more and more land so they can spray more and more slurry because it just keeps building up and up. So we were really heavily compacted. It was a heavy monoculture for decades, basically just ryegrass. Hedgerows here are cut down to basically very, very short. So in the UK, we have this whole hedgerow kind of connection in our countryside. It's kind of, it's a form of agroforestry, but especially in this part of Devon, they cut it right down to the ground. So you don't get any nesting birds in there really because it's too short. And if they are nesting, they'll generally get splayed with slurry every couple of weeks. So we don't get a lot of biodiversity in our hedgerow. And so when we started to establish a lot of our agroforestry, what Lorenz was saying was really interesting because we are having problems with that, why things weren't established. Now we've heard that kind of makes sense now through that compaction. And so we really struggled to get things going in the first couple of years. We tried cover crops in the first year to build that soil fertility up and try to build fertility through root diversity as much as possible, which is a philosophy on the farm. We do make our own inoculants on the farm. We do make things like IMOs and different soil solutions. We use a lot of lactobacillus on the farm. It's one of our chief inoculants that we make in-house. And so that seemed to help gradually by the application of soil inoculants, and lactobacillus started to break up that compaction. But really how we overcame that was after we planted our main crop trees, we just filled the space with so many different pioneer species. We crammed them in. I wish I planted more. For us, ulmus, birch and poplar work really well for us here in our climate. And then you could really see that obviously that carbon sequestration was happening. Soil fertility was increasing massively each time. Wind is also a killing factor for us. So we can have up to like 87 mile an hour winds here. We're only about a mile from the beach. So we also get those saline winds coming in all the time. And they acted as good nursery stock while those trees established. And we found that by chucking pure diversity into the system and filling it up as much as possible with the intention of felling and thinning as it came a problem to other main crop trees, that really increased the diversity. And that's why really all of our agroforestry, we try to plant as close as possible, as diverse as possible, because that's the way that we found we can overcome so many problems that the farm has. But now with our agroforestry 5 years in, the soil structure and fertility is just increasing massively, that it's just getting easier and easier now for us to establish systems.
Yeah, I really like that example as well. And it gives a difference in perspective from what we were talking about earlier, but a lot of similar patterns that can be used and extrapolated into adaptation for wherever anybody is putting this into practice. I think that's a good time now to go into the Q&A session. There are a couple of questions here in the chat, but I'm also going to give priority to people who'd like to answer.
Now, before we wrap this up, just remember that these episodes are only the beginning of the learning resources, design and coaching services, in-person courses, and interactive community that are available through Regenerative Skills. The Discord server is our free community where you can connect with other like-minded listeners, exchange ideas, stories, tips, and resources, as well as interact with me directly and quite a few former guests from this show. Our Instagram account @regen_skills is the best place to see the projects that me and the team are working on, both for clients and collaborators, as well as on our own properties. I'll also be announcing the certification courses, workshops, and gatherings that we've got coming up later this year. If you're interested in getting dedicated support for your own project, You can now schedule a free planning session with one of our team members through the request form on our website. You can also find all the links, show notes, and past resources there at regenerativeskills.com. We truly believe that no matter your experience, your knowledge, abilities, resources, or background, you can be a powerful force for regeneration on this planet, and we're here to help you find your path. So as always, remember to keep taking those little steps every day towards a regenerative future, and I'll be right by your side along the way.